Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming to the King's Global Institute for Women's Leadership event on Tradwives. I'm Heejung Chung, the director of Jewel, we like to call it. So I came across Nara Smith. Those of you who don't know it, Nara Smith is probably one of the most famous of the Tradwives. I came across her content a couple of years ago, and it was one, maybe 2-3 years ago. It was one where she is in a beautiful couture dress in a pristine kitchen, like slowly rolling Cocoa Pops for 2 hours. And it was extraordinary. And I thought it was a parody, actually. I was like, who's doing that? And actually, if you see the snide comments in that video, you'll see that loads of people are saying, like, what is happening? How the hell is she making Cocoa Pops from scratch? Like, she was milling her own, flour, etc. And like, where are the children? Aren't they like dying of hunger, etc.? But I mean, here's the thing. So I've also found it really alluring. I couldn't keep my eyes off of her. She's gorgeous, but also, it just felt like for someone who's a working mom, who's always being chased, feels like there's no moment of time. I in most days feel like and look like I've been hit by a bus. It just felt like she was from another universe, a universe where time, energy was abundant, and how the house cleaned itself and the children took care of themselves. I think since then, the Tradwife phenomenon has really skyrocketed. It has kind of started from a little niche kind of thing that people did to a global phenomenon where now Cambridge Dictionary includes it in its lexicon for the first time this year. And in a way, we could think of it as, it's just a bit of fun, isn't it? It's just something that women look at for fun, to make fun of people who are like that. Or maybe you look at it because of the home decor, maybe just like for cooking inspirations, childcare inspirations, maybe. But increasingly, we're also seeing a lot of people sounding an alarm about how a lot of this content, maybe directly or at least serving a slightly insidious agenda, maybe religious fundamentalism or authoritarianism or kind of right-wing politics, in addition to moving everyone backwards with regards to the progress we've made in gender equality. But perhaps more importantly, there is a bit of a false, dangerous narrative at play here. Behind the scenes of this very seemingly well-taken care of woman, there is a bit of a hidden story that we don't get to see. The fact that a lot of women, when they leave the labor force, it isn't because they're desperate to, mill their own flour, but rather because they just cannot stand having to juggle impossible work and family demands, where increasingly we are seeing like cost of childcare, insecure but not so well-paid jobs, pressure to be the ideal worker where you just have to be on and working all the time, very long hours, while also meeting the expectations of the ideal parent where you have to be with your children every single moment of their lives. And when they do leave the workforce, they don't really live up to the Tradwife fantasies. They end up, in many cases, financially insecure, but also doing an incredible amount of housework drudgery where it's not really leisure, but burnout and stress at home. And also, I think, before we kind of move on to present the report, I want to highlight also, for many of us, especially the older generation in the crowd, we know that especially the Tradwife, one of the things that were alarming us was it was a beautifully filtered video, but it hides the fact that what many of the grandmothers knew, where when you don't have a choice to work or when you are financially dependent, that means the loss of autonomy and power that leaves women vulnerable to coercion, control, and sometimes even violence. And that's not a nostalgia we wanted to go back to. But having said that, we wanted to look at the data. We wanted to look at the data to see there's been a lot of kind of think pieces, podcasts, and news around Tradwives and the growth of Tradwives. And we want to have especially with the ESRC Festival of Social Sciences, have a conversation about whether or not we are indeed seeing a growth in the retraditionalization of young people, especially young women. And I think this is quite interesting because a lot of attention has been put on young men, but how about young women? And we want us to really look at the hard data to see whether, especially over time, if young women are wanting to go back towards the traditional gender roles, or if there's something else going on. But anyways, we don't want to just talk at you, and I've just been talking to you for about 5 minutes. But we want to have a proper conversation, and I'm really excited to have you here with us today. And just to let you know that we will have a panel and we'll have a presentation, but we really want to focus on the discussion with the audience later on. And we really would like your opinions throughout today. And to do that, to help us kind of start off the conversation, we couldn't have a better panelist than the ones we have today. So we have Ellen Scott, the digital editor of the Stylist magazine and the author of the newly published Working on Purpose, How to Find Happiness at Home, and she writes extensively on the topics around young workers' work and meaningful work. Lily Emery, junior commissioning editor of the Daily Mail. She writes frequently. Actually, you know what? I've just realized it might be better I'll introduce you when they're on the stage. But let me then, before we move on, to have Shiyu and Constance speak and present a report, let me just put the Mentimeter on. So as I said, we wanted this to be more of a conversation rather than a presentation. So we wanted to ask you, and hopefully you have Wi-Fi, to see what you think when you think about Tradwife. What are some of the words you think about when you're thinking about or associated with Tradwives? While you do that, I'm just going to give some housekeeping notes. So we're going to first have a presentation from Constance Beaufils and Shiyu Yuan, the authors of the report. And then we'll have a panel discussion with our amazing panelists, which I will introduce actually later. And also, while you do that, I am going to do housekeeping notes at the end of today. We would love your feedback, so please, there's going to be another link that you will be given where you, especially for those of you online, but also in person, to feedback on how you felt about the event. And also note that the event is being filmed and photographed, and you may appear in the photographs or film. And if you do not want to be filmed, please let one of our staff members know, especially Halima there in the back, who's been organizing this. Also, I also was asked to say we would love to engage you in further events. So yeah, please find us on LinkedIn and Blue Sky. But let's see, what are some of the words you associate with Tradwife? Okay, patriarchy, unrealistic, 1950s backwards, ballerina farm, sexist, performative. But also nostalgia, claustrophobic, and cookies. I love cookies and blonde, delusional. But anyways, while we do that, I'm going to invite Shiyu Yuan and Constance Beaufils onto the stage. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm going to present our online survey. So basically, in September 2025, we ran a short online survey with around 1,000 women aged 18 to 34 in the UK. Now, we use a platform called Prolific, which is widely used in academic research. So what we do, basically, Prolific randomly invites people who fit our criteria, and then once they give consent, they will be redirected to our questionnaires. And then, in the survey, we had ended up 930 valid responses after removing these incomplete or low-quality responses. And what we're trying to do is trying to get an appealing answer of 4 things. First, how they personally feel about the Tradwife lifestyle. Second, what kind of impact they think the Tradwife content has on society. Third, whether they could imagine themselves living this way in the future. And lastly, if anything, what actually elements of Tradwife they find interesting or appealing or unappealing. So what do we find? Firstly, just show some description of our sample. We can see majority of women in our sample are quite familiar with Tradwife, but 70% actually saying they knew Tradwife moderately, very, or extremely well. And when it comes to the attitude, from this figure we can see, majority actually hold a quite negative attitude. For example, we can see this around 59% of women said tradwife content is harmful for society. And if we're looking at the overall impression, we can see nearly half of women said this is a negative thing for them. And only about 7.8% of women saying they would like to adopt this lifestyle in the future. However, I have to point out there's still a quarter of women saying they probably want to live this way in the future. So despite we see majority have negative views, we can see there's still something curiosity or appeal behind this tradwife thing. So we're trying to understand what really makes the tradwife content attractive for women. If we look at these slides, we can see what really attracts women is not these traditional gender roles that drives engagement. It's more about this lifestyle being presented. For example, we can see there's around 80% of women saying they like this relaxed, calm, no stressful lifestyle, and about 62% really like this luxury lifestyle, and another 59% like these traditional ways of cooking and childcare. On the other hand, if you look at the bottom three elements, we see these traditional family roles like men as the main decision maker, women as a homemaker, or have many children were the least appealing elements among women. That said, there's one interesting exception, as we can see from here. While majority still reject this idea of male breadwinner, we see there's around 30% still thinking this is something appealing or very appealing. So we want to look this closer. We can see here, if you break this down by this political views, we see here is many of these conservative women, they believe this is something appealing or very appealing, about over half. Whereas if we're looking at these left-leaning women, it's only a quarter of them actually thinking there's something appealing or very appealing. So what this really tells us from this survey is that tradwife trend is not simply about women really want to go back to 1950s, as we see from everybody's polling just now. It reflects something deeper, a growing frustration among women nowadays with this modern work and the family lives. And for many women today, as they have to deal with long working hours, job insecurity, with limited policy support for childcare and high-quality flexible working, the idea of male breadwinner can look like the only viable way for them to balance work and family. And this is where the risk lies. If trying to balance work and family is the only way to by stepping back, then it can end up reinforcing these women's dependence, limiting their autonomy, and in many cases, even make them more vulnerable to domestic violence. Now I hand over to Constance, who will shed more light on the cultural and social shifts.
So to complement those results, we then used several large-scale, nationally representative surveys that allow us to measure young people's behaviors and attitudes. This way, we wanted to see whether the tradwife trend reflects broader patterns or is mostly an online phenomenon. And specifically, we asked two main questions. First, is there any real evidence that women are actually turning away from employment and specializing in the domestic sphere, which would signal a return to traditional family models? And then, are young people increasingly embracing traditional views on gender roles, where women belong in the domestic sphere and men in the professional sphere? And to address those questions, we combined several data sources. First, we measured behaviors using data from the Office for National Statistics, calculated on the labor force and time use surveys. The labor force survey interviews around 60,000 people every quarter, which allows to track employment rates, working hours, and couples' arrangement over work. The time use surveys cover about 15,000 individuals in total and include detailed daily diaries on paid work, childcare, housework, and leisure time. Then, to measure attitudes, we used multiple waves of the British Social Attitude Survey, each with several thousand respondents, covering nearly 4 decades of data on attitudes toward gender roles and paid work. We also used data on 8,000 adults from the last UK Gender and Generation Survey, which captures, among other things, views on work-family balance. So let's first look at what's happening in terms of how couples share professional and family responsibilities. The question we asked is there any evidence that families are going back to more traditional arrangements? And what we found is actually quite clear. Despite the popularity of tradwife content online, the traditional male breadwinner, female homemaker model has never been the norm in recent decades and is becoming even less common. What we see is that women's participation in the labor market has kept increasing in the last decades, and it actually reached 72% this year, which is the highest rate ever recorded. Men's rates, on the other hand, remain fairly stable, hovering between 75 and 80%. But it's not just about whether women are in paid work. It's also about how couples divide paid work responsibilities when they have kids. And here's the interesting part. The most common arrangement has actually changed. While it used to be the 1.5 model, where fathers work full-time and mothers work part-time, the model where both parents work full-time has now become the most frequent. As you can see here, in 2021, more than half of parents were both working full-time, compared with 44% who were in the mother part-time, father full-time setup. And this really contradicts the idea that the tradwife trend reflects any widespread return to traditional family arrangements. Now, what about unpaid labor, that is to say housework and childcare? Well, what the data shows is that women still do most of it, but men are becoming slightly more involved. For example, while fathers spent an average on 47 minutes per day on childcare in 2014, this increased to 55 minutes in 2022. So this is very moderate, but still goes against the idea that they're doing less and that we're reverting to a more gendered division of labor. And so, in summary, there's no evidence that UK households are reverting to traditional models. In fact, if we consider women's participation in paid work, couples' arrangement over work, and even unpaid labor division, couples seem to be adopting more progressive approaches to sharing work and family responsibilities. But this doesn't mean it is easy. Women still carry most of the domestic load, as we can see here, and in the context of high childcare cost and cost of living crisis, their participation in paid work comes with significant strain. Now, let's look at young people's perceptions of what gender roles should be. So not just what they're doing, but what they actually believe. So the British Social Attitude Survey, in those surveys, people are asked whether they agree with a few statements that describe traditional gender roles. For example, they are asked whether they agree with the fact that a man's job is to earn money while a woman's job is to look after the home, or whether children suffer when the mother works. And looking at 2022 data, what we see is that only a minority of people across all age groups actually support traditional gender roles. For example, here, only between 5 and 12% of people across all age groups agree that men should earn money while women should look after the home. And we observe similar trends for other statements. For example, less than 20% of all individuals agree with the statement that what most women want is a home and children, and more than 60% of all individuals across all age groups believe that partners should contribute equally to the household income. Another important thing is that younger people generally hold more egalitarian views than older generations. For example, here, only 12% of men and 17% of women aged between 18 and 34 reported that they believe that a preschool kid is likely to suffer if the mother works, compared to 26% of men and 39% of women aged over 75. What is more, when we look at trends over time from 1989 to 2022, we see that support for traditional gender roles has steadily declined. So for this same statement, namely when a preschool kid is likely to suffer if the mother works, the proportion of men aged between 18 and 34 who agreed fell from 40% to about 10%. It also dropped for men of other age groups, older age groups, and for women who are aged over 35. In comparison, younger women's view around this topic remained relatively stable, with a brief peak in 2012. Importantly, we observe similar trends for other gender role statements, which are all available in the report. So both young men and women remain more egalitarian than older cohorts, and there's no evidence that younger people are returning to more traditional attitudes toward gender roles. While younger generations aren't embracing traditional gender norms, the tradwife trend clearly resonates with some of them. And the question we ask is why and what's actually going on. So what our analysis suggests is that it isn't actually about wanting more traditional family arrangements. It's more about rejecting contemporary work culture, particularly the norm of the ideal worker who puts work above everything else. So since 2015, the British Social Attitude Surveys has asked people whether they think that paid work is generally bad for mental and physical health. And what we found is quite clear. Younger people are more likely than older generations to view paid work as having a negative impact on health. So here, if you look at 2022, we can see that almost 20% of women in the youngest age group said that they believe that paid work is generally bad for mental health, and that was about 15% for men, while this proportion is below 10% for older age groups. And importantly, it isn't just an age effect, as we see that the proportion of young people expressing this view has increased over time. Indeed, what we see is that among women aged between 18 and 34, the share reporting that paid work has a negative impact on mental health increased from under 10% before the pandemic. Now, looking at ideal working hours, we also see that people clearly want both mothers and fathers to work fewer hours than they currently do, which indicates a desire for better work-life balance. For mothers, we can see that the ideal reported is part-time, around 24 to 27 hours. And interestingly, the youngest group of women, aged between 18 and 24, actually prefer slightly longer hours, so 27 compared to 24 for the oldest age group. And almost none of them think that mothers shouldn't work at all. For fathers, young men prefer the shortest week of about 32 hours compared to 36 hours for older groups of men. So considering that currently mothers work about 30 hours and fathers 40 hours, this indicates that there is a broad support for reducing working hours, especially among younger generations of men and women. So taken together, this paints a clear picture. The data consistently supports a model where the tradwife trend is not a symptom of a cultural change, but rather a symptom of underlying structural issues. First, behaviors don't match the tradwife aesthetic. Women's employment is at its peak, and both parents working full-time has now become the norm. Second, attitudes remain egalitarian, with young people being more progressive than older generations. And third, it seems to be about work culture. Young people are critical of paid work's impact on mental health, and they want balanced arrangements for both parents. So the tradwife trend reflects dissatisfaction with modern work and not a genuine desire to return to traditional family models. For some, stepping back may seem like a way to find a balance, but it also underscores how difficult achieving this balance is. And in short, young women today are not turning away from equality. They are responding to a system that makes work-life balance and well-being hard to sustain. And this signals that the demand is not a return to traditional gender roles, but for new structures that enable genuine equality in both public and private life. Thank you.
I mean, I was a part of the reporting team, but that was fantastic. So I would like to, while I kind of introduce the panel members, I would like you to get another MNT up. This is now asking you, what are your first thoughts about the results that we just presented, which you might pick up with the panel. So while you do that, I'm going to introduce the panel members to you again, if you could come up. So we have Ellen Scott, the digital editor of the Stylist magazine and the author of the newly published book, Working on Purpose and How to Find Happiness at Work. She writes extensively about topics around younger workers' work and meaningful work. We have Lily Emery, the junior commissioning editor of the Daily Mail. She writes frequently about the Gen Z experience, busting myths, challenging assumptions, and separating truth from social media hearsay. Kate Nightingale is the director of communications, campaigns, and research at the Young Women's Trust, the UK's largest charity dedicated to creating a more equal world for young women. And finally, Daniele Diaz, who is an ambassador from the Young Women's Trust and also a student at KCL, the King's College London, at the Social Sciences Department. And we're really thrilled to have her voice on the panel. So I will now move up to here. Looking at the first reactions. Okay, fascinating, reassuring. That's me too. Actually, as someone who started this report, I was like, what if we find something that we really don't want to share with the world? What are we going to do? How are we going to hide that? But fortunately, there weren't many that were like that. Shocking, surprising. Thank you for whoever wrote 4-day week now, because that is something that we're really trying to work hard on doing at Jewel as well. We won't work. We need to change. Myth-busting. Correlation. I don't know. I wonder what that correlation bit. You'll have the opportunities to share your thoughts later on. So, anyways, before more specific questions that I will kind of give to each of you, what were your first thoughts? What were your kind of first reactions to some of the results of the reports? What were the surprising bits? Anyone wants to start?
Shall I start?
Yeah.
I mean, reassuring is the biggest word there, and that was my reaction too. Very reassuring to know that we're not heading fully into Tradwife territory, and that's definitely aligns with what I experienced working with young women and looking at data on young women. So I'm pleased that I'm not kind of out of kilter with what the data's telling us. There's a huge amount of alignment here with what our data at Young Women's Trust is finding about the world of work just not being a particularly happy or healthy place for young women. And in terms of the report and the research that you've done here, I just think it's a really helpful redirection of attention from the Tradwife phenomenon per se to, what are the actual challenges that young women and young people more widely are facing at work and what we can do to fix them. So, yes, that's my reaction.
Yeah. Anyone else want just a first reaction?
I would say I also was reassured, but I'm still quite worried alongside it, because I think that reading that Tradwife lifestyle is appealing still to some young women, and the aspects that they find appealing about it just confirms my worries that work is really in a terrible place. That it's so bad that we think our only way out of it is to go into these very kind of regressive backwards views. So reassured and then worried at the same time.
Lily, did you want to?
Yeah, I'd say also I thought it was really interesting how one of the outliers that you guys mentioned is that still thinking that men should be the primary breadwinner. That seems fascinating to me, that while maybe women are kind of don't want a traditional lifestyle or don't want to go into those kind of conservative gendered roles, there's still a kind of pervasive idea of men being a primary breadwinner. And I wonder whether that might interact with other trends that correlate with tradwives of kind of sprinkle feminism and it all being and kind of aligning with the provider, which I think we can see coming through more now on TikTok and social media.
I was thinking, I don't know sprinkle feminism, but that result was surprising to me. I didn't want to talk too much about it because, I just wanted to almost hide it. But it also reminded me of, I want a guy in finance, 6'4", blue eyes. What was it? I forgot something. That trend also,
That feels like still pervasive in some way, which is interesting.
Yeah, Daniele, did you?
Yeah, I think I was really relieved with the data, just because as a young person, I believe that it is really important to not lose sight of your own identity, because the whole concept of a tradwife is your identity is solely in the, I guess, the home sphere, rather than beyond that, the private life. So I think it's really important that the data really shows us that, yeah, this is not the case, and that there are other issues that are more related to do with work and stress, and yeah, just really relieved personally. And I hope that it's simply a trend and something that is a glamorized way of living rather than an ideal way of living, like a standard of living, if that makes sense. So, yeah.
So let me start with you another question. So does the report resonate with kind of you and your friends? And also, if you do have a lot of friends who are like or yourself as well, looking at this, so what is really driving that? And how is it just like a bit of kind of voyeurism, or like, what do you think?
Sorry, do you mean driving the trend?
Yeah. So the trend, but also like the incredible 10 million plus followers and viewerships as well, yeah.
I would say the great thing about the trend is that it puts women in a light that she's relaxed, calm, and living freely. Even though in reality, the conceptions of a tradwife is that, for example, a lot of, in the past, at least in my view, I come from a family where my mom was a tradwife prior to going into work. And that was a willing choice, but I feel like it is showing the aspects of being able to really relax and not be stressed out of, okay, when's my next shift, or what is the next step in my career, and worrying about where your kids will be, childcare costs. I feel like as someone who's still currently studying, who doesn't have that commitments, it is something that is at the back of my mind. Like, can I afford to have a family if my career does not allow me? For instance, I have great ambitions for myself, and my friends do so. And oftentimes that would just mean we either think about, okay, if we're gonna have a family, we'll have it further down the line rather than earlier, and more to do with the fact of excelling in one's own career, because it is quite different when you have children into play. And I guess the fear of that is what keeps me and my friendship group from delving into that territory of a traditional home, because it will really impact, at least I believe it will really impact your career if you don't have sufficient funds to help.
But I mean, just kind of delving on that, and also I'm happy for anyone else. Do you feel like it is seen amongst, and it might not be just amongst your type close friendship groups, but like a larger group of women, that tradwifism might be an option for them in the future? And if so, do women understand the potential repercussions and also the historical legacy of what has happened in those 1950s, the Betty Friedan, the stages of feminism, of when women were in fact kind of female caregivers and caregivers only? Do you think? I mean, it's a very, very difficult question. Like, tell me everything. Like, yeah. If you
Yeah, I mean, I guess like the further we get, I think you pointed this out in the report, the further back in history that becomes, like the more we collectively forget, and the more then appealing it becomes possibly to glamorize it. I think just going back to a point that Daniele made, in some of our research at Young Women's Trust, we have certainly seen, and this will ring true for a lot of people, young women actually stuck in the family home, like stuck living with their parents for longer, way longer than they want to, and definitely putting off having children as soon as they would want to because of the financial pressures on them. So I think when you think about it in that context, you can certainly see why it might be kind of quite appealing to have a little moment of escapism, looking at people who do have that lifestyle. Yeah. So yeah, I think the sort of contrast between what young women are really likely to get in their lives and what they're seeing on screen could be playing into this.
Yeah. So kind of on that screen point, like, so just to Lily, like, do you see, like, how do you see the role of media? So it's just been, I think, almost like the media's been picking this up quite a lot. And now, for those of you who had no idea what this was, now I think as everybody now understands it, because every day you see another post. Actually, there was another post today about what Nara Smith named her child, for example. But it's like, do you see like, do you feel like media, or like, I mean, social media obviously, and the social media trends, and it's like, is it
actually almost driving it, maybe driving this into like getting women more interested in it?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, media is always responding to trends that are picking up. That's what we're looking for. I think that also I think what's interesting with these social media influencers and the coverage that they get in the media is that they're portraying a kind of traditional lifestyle, say Nara Smith, who's, you know, portraying you staying at home, all these kinds of things, not working, maybe not making any money, and yet is incredibly successful at what she does and is making lots of money on her platform. And I think that there might be a kind of interesting link there, that while at one point they're portraying a lifestyle in which if you were actually living it realistically, you probably wouldn't be making an income. Whereas if you're doing it online to an audience, you are making an income through ads and things like that as an influencer. And so media coverage is going to promote you making more money. So I think there's that kind of weird maybe split between it, that at the same time that these influencers are promoting a lifestyle and the media coverage is promoting them, it's a kind of a business in itself, and that's quite a weird thing to try and reckon with, that they're selling a lifestyle that most people doing it wouldn't make money, but they are.
And in a way, like, do you feel like there is a bit of a responsibility of kind of selling this false ideology in a way without thinking about that repercussion? But
yeah, definitely. I mean, we were saying this earlier, that now I feel like we all have a lens of looking at social media that I think you can kind of tell. You're like, okay, Nara Smith isn't, you know, there might be some sarcasm here. She's not necessarily getting up in her couture dress and standing in her like flamingo pose all the time and making Cocoa Pops. Like there is a bit of like artifice to this, and everyone's aware of that. But I think that sometimes we forget that because they're filming all the aspects of their life, this doesn't mean that it's not curated.
I want to kind of go back to that curation part maybe later, but I want to kind of come to you, Ellen, about this. So, I mean, one of the things that we've highlighted in the report was about this growing negativity, because even if it's curated, I think there is a drive that goes beyond just it being presented as a nice thing to look at. It's that there's definitely some frustration we are capturing, and that it is tempting a certain kind of lifestyles or attitudes. So because you've been writing a lot about this, I was wondering, like, how do you see this kind of trend of kind of fat tradwife, or that kind of retraditionalization or redomestication of women, so to say, as an avenue of release or escapism, and the state of work today?
I think we're just so disillusioned with work in general, and I think that's been a continuing, like, rapid increase since the pandemic especially. And I think that tradwife culture is just offering some kind of escape from that, even though the reality wouldn't measure up necessarily. It's maybe not as low stress and dreamy as like these social media influencers are presenting it to be. But when you're comparing that idealized version of life to your very real version of life, where you're going to work, you're likely not well paid, you're likely working long hours, you're stressed, you're burnt out. The work-life balance has become it doesn't exist. It's all work. Of course, that seems appealing as an alternative, but I think the concern is that we're not seeing any other alternatives. Like, I worry a lot about this belief that we saw in the stats, that so many of us believe that work is bad for mental health. I worry that that makes us go, work can't be good, like that work can't be improved, like we can't actually call for change that will make things better. So I worry a little bit about that, where we're going, work sucks, so the answer is leave work, when actually it should be work sucks, so we should work to make it better.
Yeah. And I mean, so something that you've picked up on your piece, so Ellen wrote a really nice piece on the Stylist, as well as her working on purpose. Sorry. I turned it to do not disturb, but obviously that doesn't work. So one of the things that you were talking about is the dangers of this providing an individualistic approach to quite a serious problem and can you maybe kind of elaborate on that and to tell the people what, you know, your thoughts about that?
Yeah, for sure. I think that it's easy for people to put the blame on young women as the consumers of this content and also the creators of this content. They're not the ones creating the kind of heart of the problem. It's everything else. It's how difficult the world is, not just for what in work specifically, but just being a woman in general feels very, very difficult right now. And I think it's easier to pin it on, okay, the tradwives are the problem, or the young people that are getting sucked in by the tradwives are the problem, rather than saying, you know, government, capitalism, all of these much bigger, meatier issues that are going on that also, if you were to start calling them out, might impact bottom lines and profit. It's cheap and easy to make women feel bad about themselves. It's
That's the
complicated.
majority of the industry.
Exactly.
Yeah. But I wanted to kind of, we're going to talk about like what society should do, but I want to kind of pose to you, all of you, and I don't know who wants to speak on it. There's been a lot of debate about it being about kind of work and like really exhaustion and kind of escapism. But and there was a piece on The Guardian, but also in other media sources as well, including the Rolling Stones, about the dangers of it, this being pushed into right-wing authoritarianism. I was wondering if anyone would like to maybe pick up on that part. I don't know if any, or is this too?
I think it's been a real like kind of mask off moment for a lot of right-wing conservative like backwards values. The amount of comments that we've seen in the past year about women just outright saying women have to have children, that is your place. You know, if you are childless, you're, you know, a disgraced self, like the language around it from very powerful people, I think in the past couple of years it's blown my mind how blatant it is. And I think that it's not necessarily that those views are actually increasing, but they're becoming so much more prominent and publicized that I think people are picking up on them more.
And yeah, just Lily.
Yeah, sorry, I just go off on that. When you say, you know, it's happening a lot in the past few years, I completely agree. And I think we're seeing it a lot in places like America, where maybe a kind of Christian conservatism is kind of driving most of the creators that I follow or watch who are tradwives are American, and I think that while there's definitely an interesting and obvious link between conservative with a small c and a big C creators and being tradwives, I also think that it's in America that's pervasive with religion as well, and that's something that I think can be taken into account when looking at gender values both politically and religiously.
Completely would add to that though. I think like characters like Nigel Farage are just taking the American stuff and going, let's transplant it to the UK. So he's now saying loads of stuff about child-free women and all of that. Yeah. So I think you're right, like it's so much based in the US and about the specific religions that are there, but the way it's creeping over and so quickly, terrifying.
It's concerning. Yeah, I saw there's a really interesting piece in the New York Times about how the lobby groups or the anti-abortion lobby groups in the US are supporting and helping Nigel Farage in the UK. And I think that while that's not directly related to tradwives, I think that that's interesting, bringing kind of types of culture war and free speech and religious values from the US, importing it into the UK.
So I'm going to go to you, Kate, because you're doing research around these issues, and I was like, do you see such dangers, or what are some of the dangers of these kind of contents being freely kind of like prolificated, like, and all these media and social media? And I mean, the question, maybe it might be to you and maybe to the audience, I sometimes wonder, I mean, there's a danger, but I also wonder, is it a danger, but is it an assumed danger? Like, because I do think sometimes when a lot of people talk about the kind of move towards right-wing authoritarianism, I know that it's being promoted like that, but I also believe in young women that they'll be like, no way, like I'm never, like I, you know, like, and I think one of the things that our data show is that yes, the leisure lifestyle, affluent lifestyle, yes, but no way I don't want a man taking care, like deciding what I do or, how I live my life. No one's going to take my autonomy away from me. But how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, we do the research, but also the young women that we work with all the time, like, definitely believe in them. They're not going to sort of take this, without a bit of a fight, all of the stuff you're talking about. So there's definitely hope in young women. I think, yes, I don't see a danger now of young women sort of succumbing to this en masse. As you've sort of said, I think there is potentially a danger if it does impact wider social norms, that, if it does start to seep out and influence what young men expect of women or what employers think of women or politicians. And sort of another point to sort of add on the right is that they're very good at sort of jumping onto trends and symbols and co-opting them, even if they didn't provoke this to start with. So there's a danger to be aware of there. So definitely something to be cautious of. I think also the danger is that we get so focused on the tradwives that we don't think about, exactly to Ellen's point, what should we be doing to make the world of work better for people, and like look at the root causes. So I think let's look at that and focus on what we can do to fix that, and not get too caught up in the kind of content of this particular trend. And certainly let's not use it as another stick to beat young women with and criticize what they like to watch in their precious time off.
So just to kind of reiterate, so do you see a danger in actually almost, as has been done in previous times, like a certain, let's say, middle class, like men using this as a tool to try to send a certain cultural message through to the population about what women should be like, rather than it being actually drawn from women themselves, young women themselves, and presenting their life?
It doesn't hurt, I suppose. I don't know, I don't know.
Like,
but I think.
But we know that there's some funding that has been given to certain groups, certain individuals.
So to sort of see this as a useful tool to push that view that this is women's role, and white women should be having more babies, because that's kind of what it's about as well. There's a danger in that. Yeah.
So, I mean, to UK, but also to everyone, like, what can we do? What do you think is really, what is some of the crucial, necessary things that need to be done? Like, and how serious should we take, not just like the rise of tradwives, but some of because I think there is definitely, even if, not all young women are going to be tradwives, that there is certainly something not right in society, that there is a huge amount of kind of people feeling this isn't going to be sustainable. And Daniela, you've actually mentioned it very clearly, like, you have to make all these alternatives. And I think one of the things we didn't say in the report, which would have said the alternative we see is also what we find in places like Korea, lowest fertility rate ever in Seoul, it's like 0.4 or whatever it is. It's not having children. It's the complete opposite, isn't it? To not have children, not have family, just career only. But what do you think needs to happen? Like, Daniel, I think you wanted to kind of start. Yeah.
No, I was just thinking about this fear around tradwives. I feel like it shouldn't be the biggest fear that we have as young women, especially because nowadays on platforms like TikTok, Substack, there are a lot of women who come out openly giving advice, mentorship schemes online, whether that be free speeches about their experience at work, what they recommend people to do, and young people do actually subscribe to these things beyond the fun of a tradwife. And I feel like if we look beyond what a viewership would look at, they don't necessarily, the views of Nara Smith could be the same as a mentor on TikTok who's a female in the UN, for instance. And it should always be seen with a skeptic eye, because people are allowed to say what they want, right? It's essentially free press that's not regulated like a newspaper or a magazine, unless you get reported, that is. So I feel like we should view it with that in mind, because our content that we're consuming is not solely tradwives. I know algorithms work in a certain way that, yes, certain algorithms would promote content more often if you like and interact with it more. So that is an issue to do with tech itself and how it is formulated, and how we get influencers to get us influenced to buy into certain lifestyles and products. So That's my thought on that. Yeah.
Anyone else want to talk about like what do we need to do like to address some of these kind of issues that we just highlighted?
Yeah, I mean, I can come in on that. There's a lot, but I think, you know, fixing the gender pay gap, a lot of the young women that we're talking about are in, like you've said, really insecure work. Insecure work is, you know, bad for their mental health. They're clinging on for not knowing what shifts they're going to get next week, or not being able to say no to extra shifts and burning out because they're working so hard. So there's job insecurity and making that better. There's also the fact that women are in lower paid jobs than men. Partly that's because as a society we don't value the kind of work that women are paid to do, the care work, the health work, the teaching. So, you know, not a small thing, but needs to be fixed, because that gender pay gap is making it harder for couples to make choices that see them both equally stepping back from work. If the man is the one that's earning more, then it will be harder to give up that income. So the gender pay gap is actually crucial to this. We have laws about paying women equal to men, but they're not being really very well enforced. So that's something that we need to look at, and more accountability for employers. And then, of course, there is all the things we need to do to enable that equal division of unpaid labour. So affordable, accessible childcare, flexible working options for all, you know, parental leave for the dad or the second parent. So all of those things which should be in place to enable parents to make choices about what's best for them, not based on gender. Just a few on my list.
And also share parental leave so that men can stay home and take care of children. So does anyone else want to, any kind of...
No, well, I think it's interesting that we're already maybe seeing a backlash towards progress in terms of women's rights within work. I feel like there's already a kind of a push against it that maybe in certain, like specifically kind of more right-wing circles, that it's gone too far, or that they kind of so-and-so is saying that women are kind of getting more jobs or things like that. And I think that just being very aware that there is already a backlash is something that we should be monitoring and concerned about. Because if it's already happening, and as you say, there are so many things that still need to happen, then it's only going to get worse.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. One of the things I do notice is that, as we've shown, actually, if you look at the data in terms of the women's kind of employment rates, and actually the gender pay gap has been, especially for younger group, has been minus for 1 year, but still 1 year, a bit of progress. And with that, we, at the International Women's Day, and Jewel and our Global Institute for Women's Leadership, we always have an annual kind of report about the state of gender equality. And then many of you have seen that, there's a huge proportion of young men who feel like, equality has gone too far, that now we're discriminating against men, it has gone far enough. And one thing that we haven't really mentioned in the data was that actually that sentiment also goes for young women as well in some cases. Like, there is a lot of backlash in the population where we're not there yet in terms of gender equality, but it seems like a lot of people think we have. And then I think there is, again, some potential groups are trying to push that agenda forward, maybe, and this may be one of the things. Ellen, I didn't get... No, are you...
No, I have so many things that we should change. Obviously, the main one is just that we need to make work suck less.
Yeah.
Is the main thing. I also think it would be really beneficial for us to amplify other alternatives to the way that we're currently living. I think Tradwives have done a really good job of, hacking the algorithm and getting their content seen. I'd love to see some child-free women who are perhaps working but in a different way, and showing that that can be fulfilling as well. So those are my two. One easy, one harder.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. So I think one of the things I would like to see, and actually this is a project that we're planning on, is to also show egalitarian couples and how they divide it and how they end up having a better, more fulfilling, but also a happier kind of relationship. So I want to first thank the panelists for all their contributions, but I want to... I mean, I want to come to you and ask if anyone has any questions. Do we have roaming mics around? So please raise your hand and please tell us who you are before. Yeah. So here and here.
Hi, thanks so much. I'm Sophia. I just had a question about the breadwinner chart. Man's job is to earn money, women's job is to look after the family. I mean, it looks like women 18 to 34 are more conservative than women over the age of 75. And I guess I was just quite interested in that specific chart. And I'm interested in the panel's thoughts on why that might be.
Yeah. We'll just collect a couple. So Lee, you wanna? Oh, so Lee was here first, but then and then we'll go to. Oh, maybe we could go. Yes, take a couple more. Yeah, Lee first, and then.
Yeah, thank you. So Lee Chambers, CEO of Male Allies UK. Something I want to kind of bring to life is current statistics around the job market. Women are being forced out of the workplace significantly in a number of different territories. But in conversations with women on this particular topic over the past few months, there has been a theme of this is one trend that women are not going to get demonetized for putting out there. Whereas when women bring other challenges around health and talking about the reality of the world for women, they're quite often finding themselves demonetized by platforms. So how much is big tech's algorithmic ways of working suppressing women but not suppressing this? And what do you think about that?
Okay. We'll take one more over there.
Hello, I'm Tatiana Stanova. I'm an innovation consultant. I'm very curious about this research, or if there is more research into this. Paid work is bad for mental health. I understand what it means. I'm just so surprised by this. And I wonder if there is more understanding around this, like what is it? Because it's shocking to me, this finding. And I do agree with Ellen that this is where we need to focus, because it's how humans define themselves through work. So if paid work is bad, I mean, that's really, I would like to understand more.
Yeah. So, panelists, if you could pick and choose which one.
I mean, I can come in a little bit on that last question. I think it's the quality of the paid work that can impact your mental health. The research we've done at Young Women's Trust is particularly into women in insecure work, and the negative impact of being in an insecure work environment on mental health is very, very clear, because you're often, very bottom of the pile in terms of the power you have no control, you have no limited progression prospects. So, and we know that women are increasingly in insecure jobs on 0 hours contracts. So I can't really speak to the sort of wider picture across all types of work, but certainly if you're in those insecure jobs, which are increasingly part of our economy, then that has a negative impact on mental health. Ellen, you probably know more than I do about the wider data.
I think I have spent the last year talking to a lot of women in different age groups about how they feel about work, their perception of work. And the overwhelming thing I've found is that the kind of millennials are just so burnt out that, of course, they think work in general is bad. So they're going immediately, it doesn't matter if I have a job that I love, I'm still burnt out, I'm still stressed, I'm still exhausted. And I think that the younger women are seeing that. Like, I think we kind of came up through the whole girl boss hustle culture time, which was really prevalent when I was coming into my career. And I think that younger generations have seen us do that, seen how miserable it's made us. And that's the assumption now, that just that's what work is. And I agree with you, it's really concerning, because again, when I was writing, not to make this a book promo, when I was writing my book, Working on Purpose, I was really interested by all of the data shows how much better it is for you to have work than to be out of employment. And that's not just based on being able to afford things. It's the feeling of having some kind of purpose or driving force. There's the social community of having people to work with. Like, that's all so beneficial. But because the current models of work are so negative, it's really difficult for us to see that. I think we need to be able to change the things about work that aren't working to show people that work can be a real force for good. It doesn't have to suck by its nature. Not all work is terrible.
So just to put some scientific evidence on that, there is evidence, a lot of evidence, and Constance could probably say more about it, is that if you look at health outcomes, being in work is better than unemployment or inactivity, but then overwork is also bad. So there is a sweet spot. A 4-day week, possibly maybe 3-day week would probably be better. I was just on the, on that point about the differences between generations. So if you look at it, the gaps are there, but it's actually, the statistically speaking, the gaps are not significant, but they're just a little bit higher. But I do think there is a little bit, and it's in the report, and please do look at the full report. It's beautiful, it's big, there's a lot of stuff in it. One of the things I've noticed, and this was something I was thinking of maybe bringing up, is that there seems to be a little bit about the younger generation, 1835, 1824 perhaps, where there is a lot of kind of notion around, oh, it's okay for women to stay home and take care of children. And I would like to maybe think of this as the now coming back from, from the 80s, 90s kind of feminism, like women had to be like men. It's like, oh no, we're actually valuing care and domestic labor as something as of equal value. It's really hard to say because it's the data doesn't allow us to go into greater detail. But one of the things that a lot of people have mentioned was that maybe Tradwife, putting it in a very positive view, is that it is showing the beauty of domestic labor as well, but obviously there's a danger of trying to push women back into the zone. Does anybody want to say anything about what Lee just said about the algorithmic kind of pressures and the political? One of the things I would say, I know I'm in a lot of kind of LGBT plus kind of social media, and one of the things that I've been told is that a lot of LGBT plus activists' social media is kind of silenced and is not promoted compared to others. So I can't say, and this is a very, and I think for those of you who might know a bit more, might know that I think there are certain things that are being promoted, and it may be just pure algorithm, but I think there might be some other issues behind where, as you say, the monetization of certain content might be easier in this current kind of digitalized world. Yeah. But anybody want to?
Yeah, I'd say on that, I think it's really interesting that in a way we think of social media as anyone being able to say whatever they want. But if those platforms are policing or kind of pushing certain agendas, I mean, we've seen it on Twitter with different owners of different companies changing the tones or the political tones perhaps of different platforms. And I think that promoting something that is kind of pretty, often aesthetically pleasing, often white women, having children, being in the home, all of those things are kind of possibly safest for certain political groups as a kind of view of women, and hence why they might be kind of pushed on the algorithm. But I also think that it's concerning because if you're a content creator, or if you're kind of any media organization or anything creating something that you're trying to get people to watch in order to make money, you're going to lean into that more if you're getting more views from something. So I think that there's a kind of self-fulfilling cycle that if your livelihood is dependent on views and interaction, you're most likely going to lean into what is getting the most coverage. And quite often, as you say, that will likely be things that are perhaps more palatable to a potentially right-wing agenda.
I think also it's the pushing towards extremes. Like, we so see that if you can not go down the middle, but either go very far this way or very far that way, you'll get more headlines, you'll get rewarded by the algorithm, you'll get more attention. I don't want to bring up this as it's a completely separate thing, but if you look at someone like Bonnie Blue, she was rewarded by those algorithms for such a long time, and she's had to go more and more extreme to keep up with that. I think it's the same for Tradwife content. Like, it's no longer, you can't just, make pancakes. You would need to be making like 100 pancakes and like doing the flour yourself. Like, you have to keep besting yourself, and that's just what social media kind of rewards. So I think that's a scary thing in itself, is just how you have to be pushed more extreme either way.
Yeah, I was just also thinking of a thought that just popped up in my head. It's in regards to what is considered to be a good woman, and a tradwife is considered, at least historically speaking, to be the proper way of living in the past. And I feel like oftentimes people go back in history and view things in a more, how should I say, less critical light when life gets hard. I feel like that's what the algorithm, this is what these influencers have caught on to, and as you say, monetizing it. So more positive content tend to be rewarded more because people want to stay away from the worries of life than always have negative news and headlines. So if tradwives is portrayed in a more happy light, it is rewarded and also portrayed through these beautiful women with amazing outfits and carefree and carefree faces with smiles and beauty in their face. I feel like it does make sense why it's up there.
So yeah, I want to take some questions from this side of the audience. Oh, okay. First there, but there's a few more here.
I'm Hermione. I work for King's. Thank you for this wonderful, very interesting and thought-provoking event. I'm 41 and I've chosen to be a child-free woman. I have a sister I'm very close to who's chosen to be a mother. She is not working. She has a lot of support from family with childcare. She has a very strong relationship with her husband, and yet she's completely exhausted.
Yep.
And I feel like I have to justify all the time my life choice. I get patronized, I get questioned on it constantly. I find it exhausting defending my my life choice. So I think these myths around the easy life of just being a mother are so harmful. I really see that, and yeah, I was just interested in your opinion on the damaging nature of that myth.
Yeah. So we would take a couple of. I don't know who to choose. Sorry. There's one there and one here. This lady. The glasses. Yes. So the glasses first.
No, thank you. I just, first, before I ask my question, I kind of want to respond to the woman over there about a point that she made around mental health and like women not choosing to work because of mental health. So I work at the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, and one of the things that I've noticed is actually physical health is a really big barrier towards women being able to work. And a big part of my job is like going to policymakers and saying the gynecology waiting time is absolutely atrocious in the NHS, and it's one of it's the only medical specialty that's women's only healthcare, and it's going up every single month. And we do lots of reports where we talk to women and we say, why are you not working? And a big part of it is because of their healthcare, and work is not very kind to women who are pregnant, when they come back to work after pregnancy. They're at more risk of being made redundant. If you're going through menopause, if you have issues with your periods, like all of those are reasons why you might not be able to work, or you might go part-time. Put that in with mental health, with women being more likely to be in low-paid, insecure work, especially ethnic minority women and migrant women. It kind of makes sense why you decide not to work. So I think it's just a big part of being a woman in 2025. It's not great. And I think my question kind of was around...
you don't have to have a question, by the way.
Oh.
If you want to have a
okay.
you're welcome to just,
I guess one of the other things that I thought about, and Ellen and Lily, you were talking about it as well, it's kind of this idea of like right-wing conservatism. I think there's such, like in the last few years with Trump and Argentina and Italy and like the right-wing sort of ism in the world, there's such a rejection of like this woke culture that we had, and like a rejection of feminism and this like manic male panic around low birth rates. There's this massive realization that like globalization that we've had under Blair and many years, it's just completely failed. And so women feel that a lot, especially young women with like housing crisis and cost of living crisis. So I don't obviously this report shows there isn't an increase in women wanting to be tradwives, but I just wonder if there's a much more acceptance of that lifestyle. Like, I go on this Bella farm woman, and her life looks so lovely, and I'm just like, oh, so nice. But then you look at the comments, and people are like, yeah, like, you know, kudos to you, should be like, that should be respected and stuff. So I just think maybe there's more of an acceptance of that lifestyle. I wonder if you think about that.
So there's a few more questions, so we'll just, if you could, just, yeah, oh, there, yeah, just pass the mic over here. Oh, no, you could, yeah. Also.
Okay. Thank you so much. Okay, so I wanted to ask, my name is Mina, by the way. I work in education. I wanted to ask, to what extent do you think this problem is due to not seeing or having the concept of an alternative to capitalism? Because I feel like around us, from what we know from media, we've never really been in touch with or have had the knowledge of an egalitarian society or a society not based on money. So yeah, that's my question.
Thanks. Just to respond to your point quickly, love you bringing up the physical health aspect of things. I myself have experienced this, and it is difficult to find a workplace that will not create a sort of mental strain on women for women's health problems. Trying to raise to a male management, I work in financial market sales, so pretty male dominated, trying to raise to them, oh, I've got endometriosis, I can't come to work, and they're going, everyone gets period pains, is that, we don't want to talk about that. It really is part of the problem. So yeah, thanks for raising. Anyway, to my point, taking the tradwife trend as a symptom of displeasure with work culture, I think it's important, you know, to put it into context of the rise of other trends among changing work culture. For example, remote work. As I'm in sales, I live on LinkedIn, and there is definitely an increase in conversation around remote work and also women starting their own businesses. And I see it glamorized in a very similar way. They're going to post a selfie. I'm on my run at 10 a.m. because I'm running my own business and I'm living in Portugal and my life is amazing. And I think it would be very interesting to hear, I suppose, your thoughts on the tradwife trend in conjunction to these kinds of trends too. Other ways that women are kind of rejecting norms in a very empowering way and doing things that really serve them. And I suppose if you think there's a rise of that in a similar way and how that's being treated differently.
So we're going to, we'll just take those for now. I know that some of them are statements. So like, I know there's quite a mix. I'll just, while you have a thought, I'm going to talk about that remote working piece. And I do wonder if it's to do with the need to glamorize your life on social media is one thing as well. It's because I've done a lot of work, and the team has done a lot of work on remote working. And what we can say is that remote working has been served as a magic tool for women, especially mothers. Oh my God, you could do the childcare and also work and be a girl boss. But actually what you do is you exploit yourself at both ends. You're doing everything, and the person in the back was saying their sister's exhausted. Like, oh my God, you're exhausted. Why? Because you're doing a full-time job, you're doing full-time mommy, doing all the bits, and you know, no, but can you imagine, the remote working allows you to do both at the same time. So actually, a lot of that glamorization isn't actually, it might be false. But then having said that, the removal of it actually destroys women's careers. And that's what we're seeing right now with the return to office mandates, especially in the US. There's a huge proportion of women that have left, like close to, I want to say close to 500,000 or even more, left the labor market because of it. But yeah, so I think there's three things about reaction, like kind of glamorization of the potentially actually very, very difficult life as a as a stay-at-home mother and housewife. Issues around kind of health problems not being addressed, that kind of causing women to almost remove, or not being even able to access work, as well as do we need to show alternatives of capitalism, or is capitalism driving the tradwife phenomenon? So, any one of those threes, if you want to.
I mean, on the capitalism front, I think there have been so many kind of work trends that have maybe attempted to show an alternative, but they've been smacked down because capitalism is so powerful and all of our work cultures are so entrenched. Like, I think if you look at quiet quitting, first of all, the name of it is problematic. It's not quitting to just do what's required for your job, separate thing. But the immediate kind of moral panic that provoked, and how quickly everyone went, well, Gen Zs are lazy, entitled, like they're destroying the workplace. And you see a similar thing with a lot of the work trends. There was a trend that was like snail girl jobs, which was literally just women. Yeah, ridiculous. I had to write about that, so I remember it very dearly. It's just doing life a little bit slower, but because it was positioned as snail girl jobs, you'll notice, it was really attaching this idea to, well, it's young women that are the problem. They're the enemies of the current work structure that we've had for so long. I think there's just a lot of work going against the alternatives, which is scary to me. I think if you look as well at all the columnists and politicians that will speak very actively against working from home or the 4-day week, and will respond as if that's a completely outrageous notion, we should be really suspicious of that. And I think maybe we're not suspicious enough of it. We're just kind of accepting, oh, well, we've always done the 5-day week, so we should continue that. Or, you know, maybe we should all be in the office. I think we should question it a bit more, just on that point.
Just also on that point. So first of all, quiet quitting was actually just doing your job. It wasn't like quitting. It was actually doing your job, but not going overboard. But also, one last thing to on that point is that I want everybody to think, like, who is being excluded by those cultures? And you see why then 20% of young women feel like work is harmful. And also, it's not just young women, it's actually women in general that are being pushed out. But anyways, yes, going back to the panels, yeah, the other points as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think that women are always judged on whatever they do, right? I feel like it's insufferable to always hear, oh, woman this, woman that. But I was thinking about work-life balance and choices of women in a workplace. I feel like if a woman chooses to step out of work, whether that be for her health or for her perhaps to rediscover herself, take a gap year, I feel like that is often looked down on either way. If you do it for yourself, for your career, if you overwork yourself, you're always judged. At least that's what I see in my friends who are in the workplace. And I feel like beyond the workplace being a place of, I guess, distress, it's also about how gender politics work in certain fields. Like, for instance, in male-dominated jobs and things like that, the snarly comments that you hear that make you just more reluctant to go overboard and really push through with your agendas. You really have to have thick skin. And I believe that as a person of color who is navigating herself in the workplace, in different fields, even within education, there are layers to things that people often forget about, because now we're talking about tradwives in a very nuclear sense, right? We're thinking about a nuclear family that is between a heterosexual couple, but to think beyond that, couples who are in same sex or gender fluid, so forth, I feel like there are still issues that are lingering, because at the end of the world, how do I say this? At the end of the day, women are always policed in whatever they do. And we don't often hear about, oh, men just quitting their job, or we praise men to take more time off to take care of the kids. Like in Nordic countries, we're like, oh, wow, he's such a great dad. But he's just doing what a woman normally does. So I feel like work-life balance is a way in which, like, remote working can also be very toxic, as we mentioned, that, yeah, through remote work, you're just doing double shift, essentially. Working with the kids it seems like a nightmare to me. Especially if they're quite young. Like, you see these things on social media where there's a cat coming in, right? Or there's a kid. I think there was a famous one where a man was working from home and then the kids came in and then the mother just quickly dropped.
Yeah, it was the BBC.
Yeah.
He was in Korea and actually he was doing a BBC interview in the evening, but yeah.
Yeah, it's just to take that into perspective. Like, yeah, remote work is good for women. It can be good if it is regulated, but it can be very damaging. But work-life balance is what young women strive for, I think. We want the ability to take on our holidays without feeling guilty. We want to have hobbies outside work and work not being our whole personality. I think someone in the audience said that work is our life, right? I think work is more part of our life, not our life. It shouldn't be everything. It shouldn't be your identity. You shouldn't lose yourself to your title. At least that's my perspective on it.
Yeah. Did you want to come on and then you have those
Yeah, I mean, I guess we just sort of not to make this about men, but we need to make it easier for men to make those choices too. Like I'm sure I've seen something just the last couple of days about men feeling embarrassed to ask their boss for to leave early to look after their kids, or you know, we should make it just as normal for a man to do that as it is for a woman, and sort of equalise things that way. I think. Also, just what you were saying about kind of showing other alternatives. We provide coaching to young women, and often the young women who come to us are sort of hitting their mid-20s, so they've been in work a bit, but they're suddenly going, God, this is not what I want, and I'm feeling stuck. And sometimes the coaching is to help them like take the next step and get the promotion, but actually just as often, it's to help them discover that they want to take a sabbatical or go freelance and start their own business. And actually some of the really powerful outcomes that we're seeing from that is not, you know, what we thought, which was like help them get more money, but actually help them discover kind of what it is that they really want to do and go and do that. So I think there's definitely possibly a trend driven by the fact that work is kind of worse and certainly pays less for Gen Z, to sort of look at these other options and realise maybe more than sort of when I was sort of in my 20s, that work isn't your whole life. So yeah, the more we can do to sort of amplify those and celebrate all those different choices, absolutely the better.
Actually, on that note, I also I was hoping someone could kind of point it out, and actually someone who asked that question, she's gone now, but the fact that young women say, the allure of male breadwinner is like kind of attractive in the tradwife phenomenon. I want everyone to also think about what that does to men, because I think it's horrible that it's only young women who are thinking about careers, what am I going to do, and how that's going to match with if I want to have children or if I want to have a household like that. But also men should think about that, but also men should have the ability to be able to say, oh, actually I want to be a stay-at-home dad, I want to be taking care of the children, without any social bias or any kind of negative views. And we are not at the point of doing that. And I think one of the dangers of the tradwife phenomenon is it's not just about women's role, it's about men's roles. So we're pushing men into that very, very binary, kind of very rigid roles, which don't allow for them to have those freedoms that you just talked about. Because I think young men feel less able to perhaps do some of those things because you have to get on and make money. But anyways, okay, one last round of questions. Yes, you've been waiting for a long time, so we'll take all four. I'm sorry for those two. These four people have been waiting for a long time, so I'm gonna give them the opportunity. Yes.
Hello. Look, first of all, I wanted to say, what would my mum have thought about this tradwife thing? She was born in 1926, got married in 1957. In that marriage, she stayed married all their lives. She moved from the 1960s, when she was called Mrs. Richard Jackson. 1970s, she became Mrs. Elizabeth Jackson, and by the 1980s, she'd found herself, and she was Liz Jackson. And she inspired me, I have to say. But I think that generation of women would go, oh, tradwife, please, back in your box, because they understood the constraints and the lack of control that not having your own income and not having your own identity entailed. From my perspective, though, looking at this as a campaigner and a researcher on flexible working, what really jumped out at me was that stat about the most common couple work pattern now is 2 full-time wages. And that is really not what we've been looking for. If you go back 30, 40 years ago, the vision of flexible working was that it would support greater gender equality at home and at work, because both parents would work less than full-time. Yeah. So 4-day week, absolutely. Ideally, 2 people each doing a 60% week allows you to have the balance and not to rely on quite so much childcare.
Yes, 100%. Yes, over there.
Hi, my name is Sure, yeah. So after everything I've heard, it was really interesting. I just drew a couple of conclusions. First of all, I was thinking that the tradwife and traditional wives were ideal, especially in the development of patriarchy and capitalism. And nowadays, in the current state of capitalism, and also in the last couple of decades, you have the girl boss movement and all of that sort of capitalism ideology of women in the workforce that have also furthered the cause of feminism. But we've reached a space in which you have 2 full-time jobs at work as well as a normal full-time job. And I guess the question is, the tradwife trend, I think, is a reaction of having so much on your plate. And now the question is, instead of backing out into and going back into the traditional wife stereotype, how do we instead balance labor in the majority of households? And I think it's really important to center what are some practical ways in which, I mean, if we're talking about the majority, which are heterosexual couples, in which men don't do so much in the household, I think it's so important to think about how practically do we get men to participate more. Yeah, and I think also I just wanted to mention that along with the very recent studies that have shown a huge discrepancy and opposition in between ideological views of men and women, especially in the younger generation. So how we have more extreme views and also more conservative views in young men. How do we get them back on board into assuming those household roles? Thank you so much.
Yeah, okay, thank you. We're going to have to take 2 more questions, but while you do that, I just want to mention this. I don't know if there are any historians here, but I think the myth of 1950s kind of housewife, women have worked all the time. Working class women worked even during the 1950s. 1950s traditional kind of a female caregiver was a push, as you say, to get the women who were working during the Second World War in factories back at home. So this proportion of women and families who were actually like that are very, very minimal. And historically, it was actually a blimp in historical things. So this is actually the norm. So yes, the 2 full-time jobs are actually the norm.
Yeah, I guess for me, thank you. The panel's really good, really interesting points. But I wanted to delve a little bit around the naming itself. So traditional wives. You've talked a lot about work, but I'm curious to see the marriage angle, because we're assuming that they're wives, they're married, but just based on divorce rates, I just don't see how that maps out in anyone's mind. So I'm just curious how that has had that force, because, people are, I assume the younger generations are already seeing their parents have been divorced for some time. So I just don't see how that maps out either. So I just was curious around the angle around marriage as well. Thank you.
And who was it? Was it here? I don't know who it was. I remember there was a hand. One last final question, just a few seconds left.
Yes, thank you so much. 1,000,001 thoughts, but I will keep it very brief. And I'm really glad you mentioned the historian point, because I am by background a historian, and I really wanted to make that point, which is, you're absolutely correct. This is absolutely this view is very rare. And I think that kind of touches on the kind of core for me of what this comes down to. Is I feel like we've almost been having a kind of 2-track conversation around this kind of choice feminism and liberal feminism, and it feels like actually we're all pretty ambivalent on this. We both feel, I think everyone seems to feel this sense of, well, we absolutely want choice feminism, we fought so hard for it. On the other hand, these are choices which absolutely do not make sense. And then the other element of this is the kind of, and that's kind of like failure of liberal feminism, the failure of those kind of noughties approaches. And the other element is this kind of anti-capitalist approach, but we don't seem to actually want to then confront the elephant in the room, which is say, okay, what's our alternative, right? And so there's the big word missing, which is socialism. I'm not necessarily convinced that is the whole solution, and also I think there's a lot of talking about what is the form of capitalism we're talking about, right? Finland, Iceland, all these countries with much improved kind of gender equality that aren't maybe experiencing these trends as much, they're still capitalist countries. They're just doing it in a different way. And so one thing I'd love to hear is, what are the radical approaches we could take to follow some of those things like creches in the workplace. We know some of the established solutions, but clearly they're not being implemented. And actually, I think we need to face up to the fact that it's because, for whatever reason, part of which is money, part of which is political will, they are not implementable. And I think just to kind of add to that as a final aside is what I'm really curious about is this kind of
anti-intellectualism that hasn't been mentioned here, right? So this approach of kind of saying, well, actually it's a woman's choice, and we should encourage people to make these choices. It's not a bad thing in and of itself, but we're constrained by the system. What seems to be underpinning all of this is this deep, deep anti-intellectualism to actually examine what do we mean when we say tradwife? What are the details of that? Because the other element that has been completely missing from this is things like violence against women and girls, right? And what we're actually not saying is, if you become a tradwife, if you make that choice, that's absolutely your choice. But we haven't examined the issues of increased dependency, increased risk of abuse, increased inability to leave a marriage, and what that means. And that seems to be stemming actually from this real lack of desire on social media to unpack what are the negatives to that life? What is the loss of community to being at home all the time with kids, or kind of unpacking those? So those are just a few final thoughts. And so my final question to the panel, and I was the person who wrote correlation, is how are we convinced that this anti-work approach is causation, not correlation? And what are the other elements underpinning this that may have emerged, but we don't yet have the data to pull out fully? Thank you.
So we're actually out of time. I've been a horrible chair. So I'm going to give the panel members kind of 1 last minute each to kind of maybe address some of the issues, or kind of your final say. Because I think a lot of these questions were questions, but also just really, really fruitful, important thoughts that we could continue with a glass of wine after this. So please, I don't know who wants to go first.
I mean, it's really hard to answer the question about what can replace capitalism. So I am just going to say, I guess, a society that sort of values care is one in which we may sort of move towards, and I mean that in terms of both valuing paid care work, things like, if we've truly valued childcare, we would pay a childcare workforce, and we would make that, freely available. And we would also value unpaid care work in the home as a really important part of making capitalism work. And maybe if we looked at that, that might be a place to start before we overthrow the entire system.
Yeah. Yeah, I just wanted to touch upon what you briefly said about the Nordic countries and what they're doing well and why they are successful despite being also capitalist structures. I feel like we often look up to the northern countries because of how much they have progressed in that field. And I feel like it's to do with culture, because I'm quite fascinated with the northern countries. Actually, I've done research about STI rates being much higher there, but that's another story. But to do with that, I feel like it's to do with cultural differences. They value their own time. They have concepts like fika, to actually take a break, don't overwork yourself. And I think it's to do with that cultural difference that we lack in the UK. And that's the reason why they are more open to these, I guess, woke ways of living, and how well their government actually implements this by funding opportunities and initiatives to help with these cultural changes. For instance, in Denmark, if I remember correctly, the government is funding a lot of initiatives to promote vegan lifestyles and vegetarian plant-based lifestyles. And they're doing it in ways that are more discreet rather than in your face, because oftentimes people are more reluctant to change when it's forced on you, rather than it coming naturally and through daily things, just like more stores being more vegetarian and so forth. So if we were able to implement it in a way in which working moms are still appealing, we could easily mitigate the concept of tradwives if that was an imminent threat. But as the research shows, I feel like it's okay for now.
Okay, so Lily?
I was really interested by your question about girl boss, kind of that era, 2014-esque time. And if we now look back at that and see that that's what defined that space and that's what we grew up in, and it was kind of hustle culture and Sheryl Sandberg and Lean In and crashes in the workplace that she was promoting. A really interesting book called Careless People by someone who worked with her, about how her actual leadership style didn't at all align with this culture that was espoused in 2014 about kind of girl boss and hustle, and you can be a mother and you can do it all and we'll support you. And in fact, actually the culture was hide the fact that you have a child. And I think that if that was what we can look back on as defining that era for women and women in work, I'm concerned that maybe we would look back at the past maybe 5 or 10 years, that if tradwives are what's becoming kind of defining this era, even if not statistically, in terms of our kind of social commentary, where does that lead us? It seems like a pendulum that's swinging from either side, and so where do we go from there in the next 5 years? And that's quite terrifying to me.
I had so many thoughts because they were all such brilliant questions and observations that I'm trying to digest. But I think one thing about the anti-intellectualism and the kind of anti-woke thing ties in with something someone else starts about, how we get men involved and doing more. I think the kind of answer to both is that there is genuine unhappiness and dissatisfaction, and it's coming from somewhere, but people are looking for someone to blame. And it's been very easy for politicians or people in power or whoever to go, it's the woke people, or it's the foreigners, or whoever. I think that we can't tackle that until we actually acknowledge the unhappiness and the concerns that are there in the first place, before we can start saying, don't blame these people. We need to listen to men, as much as it pains me to say. We need to listen to what is bothering them, what is the problem that they're looking to solve, or they're looking for something to blame for. I think we need to hear that out.
So I just want to, before I wrap up, I just want to say the reason why Denmark is good, or some of these countries are good, was culture. But culture was formed through collective action of historical legacy of very, very powerful farmers who were able to push for that universalism in those countries. So I want to leave you with this. I know if I feel quite energized. I'm also a bit depressed, but also quite energized, but angry perhaps. Whatever that emotion is, I would like to invite you to keep having the conversations, not just with wine right now, but in future. And it could be in your workplace, it could be in your school, it could be maybe running for kind of a representative position so that you could change society. Maybe talk to your MPs, do whatever it is. There's that, I think, coming here together and talking about it, but having to do with this collectively, maybe with organizations like us, but the Young Women's Trust, it could be with your unions, but keep fighting and voicing these opinions, because I think what we are saying is that if you don't, the chances of you being silenced and being twisted around to be weaponized is very strong. And I think that's kind of some of the concluding words, and trying to fuel your belly with some sort of action that you could kind of promote in the future. But thank you very much to the panelists and everybody else. Again, we will have the report ready for you to download and read in great detail. There's a post-event survey. Please serve it out. If you can't do it right now, we will probably send it out via email, so you can please fill it out. But thank you so much for coming. And yeah, hope to see you in our next events. Thank you.